All right. Well, it is good to be back. So last week I wasn't intending not to have class, but was exposed to some cold outdoor air, and Wednesday of last week I just started having a really sore throat, and I wasn't coughing or having any other symptoms, but it was bothering me a lot. So talked it over with Jack and just decided it's like I knew for sure I could teach Wednesday night if I tried to pull through, but I wasn't sure if I did that, if I'd have any voice left for Sunday morning. So opted to try and save my voice for Sunday, and I think all in all that worked out well. And fortunately, I didn't ever get any worse after that. So just wasn't quite feeling very good last week. And the nice thing about this kind of a format is that it's so easy to get it wherever you are. So as long as you've got internet access, you can pretty well tune in. The downside is I've got quite a bit of equipment and software that I've had to learn to use involved in doing these classes, and so it's really not very simple just to say, hey, someone step in and teach for me tonight, or this night I'll have everyone else talk more. This is I interact with you, but it's always a bit of a hour-long monologue. So that was what was going on last week. Several of you are asking, so appreciate your concern. Good. So want to remind everybody, if you would like to get reminders about when classes are going to be going live, I think we've got about 3 more in this relationship study we've been doing. Still trying to make my mind up on what I want to do after that. But about 3 more of these. You can go to this website address, rmd.at/KC midweek, and go there. It's very easy to use the Remind app to sign up to get notifications whenever classes are about to be happening. I try to send one of those every Wednesday, usually about half an hour before class, just to give everyone a little reminder. Okay, so for tonight, I was having a hard time deciding what to title this. So I decided on What Do You Think? What do you think? There are different tones in which you could ask a question like that. I'm intending it in the non-passive aggressive sense, the non-dismissive sense. I'm intending it in such a way that you would really be asking your spouse, your significant other, what is it that you think about this? What is it that you feel about this? Really, what's going on inside your head? Help me understand what it is this is like for you. So that's the question I pose as the title for tonight. I've got several things lined up. Depending on the type of stuff I'm doing, I've gotten reasonably good at estimating time. My class tonight, I'm just not sure with the content I've got. I've been having a hard time estimating. It may go short tonight. It may go long. I just don't know what it's going to be like until I start digging into all this. So got some different material we're going to look at this evening. We're going to be talking, of course, on the subject of influence. If I'm asking you what you think, what I'm saying is that I am open to your influence. When I was doing just a Google search for images labeled influence, I came across this one, and I don't know, I really like it. So I'm just curious, when you look at this image, how do you think this does as a representation of what influence can look like? Like if you could visually pick out something about this image that you think is interesting, meaningful, or maybe something that's wrong. Like, how do you react when you see this image as a representation of what influence would be? I'm curious. Would like to hear from you. Of course, the first thing I think of is the Pink Floyd "Dark Side of the Moon" album. There's some definite overlap in the light source and the prism. However, I think that there's something to be said for me being receptive to what it is you have to say, but also recognizing that when I am receptive to other people's perspectives, especially those of my spouse, it not only helps me in one specific area, but it might actually change the way that I look at a lot of different things. In my prep for tonight, I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. This particular lesson, I'm going to end up being harder on the guys than I am on the ladies because according to the data, guys don't do this thing we're going to talk about as well as women typically do. So that might show up as we go. But a lot of the stuff that I was encountering were things about how, for example, when a young guy gets married, it is often the case that the female is much more in tune with things like the aesthetics of the living space, the house or apartment. How do I have this decorated? What do the decorations make me feel like? What are the patterns involved? What's the significance of the items? Also, things like cleanliness. So there was a great story. One of the books I was looking through, it was a guy who saw his new wife cleaning their apartment and asked, not being silly, "Are we moving out?" And he had lived with a bunch of other guys, and guys don't tend to be especially clean when they're on their own. And so when he saw her cleaning the apartment, the only time he had cleaned his previous apartment was when he was moving out of it. And so that was his serious question. He saw her cleaning things and was like, well, are we leaving it? So yeah, we can we come from different worlds on some of this stuff, but just one example of how our backgrounds and experiences can affect the way we are and what we understand, and part of why it's important for us to connect and to be influenced by each other. So the area of cleanliness, I really experienced that myself. I was taking classes at the Harding, I guess now it's the Harding School of Theology in Memphis. It used to be called the Harding University Graduate School of Religion. And I was there for a short course, and I was staying with a friend on campus. The first time I had gone there, I had stayed with him and hadn't thought anything of it. Then I tried staying again after I had gotten married and had gotten kind of used to the way we did things at the house. And when I tried staying with a bunch of single guys in their apartment space, I'm telling you, like, that bathroom had never been cleaned before. Like, everybody thought it was someone else's job, or they just didn't care. So I legit drove to the store, like Dollar General, bought a bunch of cleaning supplies, and I came back and cleaned their bathroom for them because I just couldn't stand it. And even though when I was in college, my mom has stories she'll tell about just how disgusting our dorm room would be. But, I was certainly influenced early in my marriage. By the time I went back for a short course, what used to seem normal to me, I could no longer put up with. So hopefully that's a sign of growth and maturity. Let's see. Got a couple of comments coming in. Cheryl, actually, this is Randall speaking through Cheryl here. Looks like the influencer believes that they are passing information like a laser beam. The listener, though, looks like they are not sure exactly what the speaker is saying, or that they are getting a lot more out of it than the speaker intended. That's possible, Randall. Yeah, sometimes we might hear or interpret things the other person wasn't necessarily saying. So yeah, different ways to look at that. Okay. Shades of Joe's apartment. Gotcha. Very good. Very good. All right. So I'm going to keep moving here. There's a few scriptures that I thought were worth investigating. So just imagine that you are in the role of a marriage counselor, a social worker, someone who is there to observe, investigate, make recommendations perhaps, but really looking for areas of concern. I'm going to bring up a few different couples from Scripture, and as I'm not going to read any of these stories at length, I'm going to kind of summarize them, but I want you to be working on answering this question for me. Like, what in this story would you say are some areas of concern in the relationship between these two? So let's start with Isaac and Rebekah. You might remember that Abraham was in his old age. He sent his servant to go and find a wife for his son Isaac back among their kinfolk. It ended up being like this divine providence, beautiful event where God led him, he kind of prayed, God, if you have someone in mind, let it be a woman who does this and this. And then Rebekah shows up, does exactly those things. It's a really exciting connection. So Isaac and Rebekah seem to be a great couple starting off. But in his old age, Isaac makes a decision. Isaac has two sons, or actually I should say Isaac and Rebekah have two sons. Each of them favors one of the sons in particular. Isaac likes Esau. He's a man of the field. He likes to hunt and fish and gather and, manly stuff. And then Jacob would rather kind of hang out at the house. He'd rather work in the kitchen, cook stuff, but very, very different personalities. So Isaac, in his elderly years, decides he wants to pronounce a blessing for Esau. Meanwhile, his wife finds out about it, and Rebekah quickly grabs her son Jacob and says, while Esau is out hunting and looking for the thing to cook, I'm going to go ahead and cook everything exactly the way that Isaac likes it, and you're going to go in there and pretend to be your brother. And so she's trying to make sure that he gets the blessing rather than his brother. And so the end result of all this is that between the blessing and the deception, the end result for a long time is that once Isaac dies, Jacob has to flee for his life. Esau wants him dead. And though there is a tearful, beautiful reunion many years later, he spends a lot of his life on the run. And God is with him throughout all that. But just the same, his life is pretty hard. I would suggest some of the harshness of his life stems from the behaviors of his parents, Isaac and Rebekah. So if you're looking at the way that stuff unfolded with Isaac and Rebekah over the birthright blessing stuff, what would you say are some areas of concern? I would love to hear from you. If you want to type anything, send it my way. What would you say are some areas of concern in the way that they are interacting? So, for one, if you notice that when Isaac makes the decision to bless Esau, it's pretty unilateral, isn't it? Isaac is making his own call. He doesn't bring her in to consult. He doesn't consider anything other than his favorite. He's just going to move ahead with exactly what he wants to do. Off the top of my head, I would say something else that seems problematic to me is the way that Rebekah is so content to just go behind his back. So, so one problem for sure, Cheryl, is, favoring one child over the other. Yeah, that's big area of concern. It doesn't go well. It doesn't make the kids feel good. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, lack of communication and honesty. And that's kind of what I'm looking at. You don't see them talking to each other at all. This major event in their sons' lives. I mean, it really is. Receiving the blessing, this is like dad's getting ready to go. This is like an inheritance matter. So this is a big deal. And notice that they're not even talking to each other about any of this. So lack of communication, and then the blatant dishonesty, especially on Rebekah's part, where she works knowing her husband is blind. Wouldn't you say it's a particularly, I don't want to use the word despicable, but really to take advantage of a person with some sort of a handicap? She is doing that right now. So I think that's not, it does not endear me to Rebekah in her later years to see what she does there to Isaac, even though I think Isaac is a little bullheaded and inconsiderate in the way that he goes about handling this blessing stuff. So anything else you guys pick up on? You're welcome to keep weighing in if you're busy typing right now. I'm happy to kind of revisit this story as we go. But yeah, want to hear your thoughts on that? Okay, I got another couple we're going to talk about. Same routine, areas of concern. Nabal and Abigail. Nabal is an interesting biblical character because his name means fool. Some of the people like this, this is good. Thank you, Sandy. But back then, would she have had any say-so? So I think it is correct that probably not, Sandy. I mean, it has really been most of human history that women are pretty systematically treated as secondary and not included in major decisions. And so he would absolutely be, expected to, care for her as the head of the household and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily was expected. This is a good example, though, where even if that is the cultural norm, just because it's a cultural norm doesn't make it good or right, does it? So I would say probably that's correct, that this was a normal way to do things culturally. I would also say wasn't healthy, because look at the fruit of the actions. It turned out really badly in that household. So yeah, great question to ask, and I think what you're asking is right on there, Sandy. Yeah, probably wouldn't have had any say so. So same routine, but let's talk this time about Nabal and Abigail. Nabal, his name means fool. I have been curious sometimes. There's a few different people in Scripture whose names are rather unflattering and have some implication for what they're like. Like they tend to live into their names and what they've been called. Peter would be one example where Jesus says to Cephas, I'm going to call you Peter, because Peter, like we would say, it means rock, but we have people we would call Rocky. There's kind of the implication of him being, I don't know, hard-headed, bold, solid, whatever you want to put on that. But people have a way of kind of living into their names and nicknames. I have wondered if Nabal, man, did his parents really name him that? Was this like a nickname he earned along the way, that's just what he was known as? I don't know. I don't have any reason not to believe that's his actual name. But here's a foolish guy, and he acts like a fool. Nabal refused to show any hospitality to David and his men. King David, he may not have been, at the time, in fact, I don't believe he was king yet. I could be mistaken about that. I can't remember the sequence. But David is out with his men. They've been around some of Nabal's property and his people. They haven't harassed him, bothered him, taken anything from him. So he sends a very cordial messenger to Nabal and says, hey, if you wouldn't mind, please, this is a harvest season. You've probably got more than enough. My men are really hungry. If you just wouldn't mind giving us some of what we need so we can have some food, and we'll get out of your hair, right? Like, we're not going to bother you. Nabal responds as harshly as he possibly could have. And he's like, I'm not going to share any of this stuff. I might need it for my men. And so he's just known as a wealthy guy, but also very miserly. And so David gets so angry that he's ready to kill him. And meanwhile, Abigail, Nabal's wife, finds out what's going on. She intervenes. She brings food. She brings gifts and says, please, 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 I didn't hear anything about this, or I would have already sent you stuff already. Sadly, my husband lives up to his name. His name is Fool, and he is a fool. Just ignore him, that kind of thing. So in that relationship, I'm once again curious. Areas of concern between Nabal and Abigail. Areas of concern. This is interesting. Thank you, Brenda. Her servants turned to her. They knew Nabal's character and the danger they might be in. Isn't that interesting? That she is certainly known as the presence of wisdom in that household. So back to your question, Sandy, would women have been generally given much influence? Oftentimes not. But boy, what a good thing it was in Abigail's case that she was at least given a heads up so she could do something. She's clearly a woman of better character than her husband was. So yeah, they knew to turn to her because she's a wise person. Revisiting that last story, Randall says Esau was firstborn. That had many connotations in that culture, which is correct. Of course, there was nothing that would prevent a father from blessing each of his children. This is what Jacob did. And, though, Randall, if you read that blessing of Jacob to his sons, it's not all sugar plum fairy stuff. There are some of his sons where he just says, man, you're like a wild animal and you're going to have a lot of trouble with this and this and this. His blessing in some places to me seems more than just pronouncing good things on him. It's a lot of kind of telling it like it is. Well, this is the kind of guy you are, and this is what your life's going to be like, but you're going to get this and this, So, that blessing is an interesting word really to use for what they were doing, but there is great significance in it for them. You would like to think that he would have been thinking of Jacob, but it seems that he wasn't even really thinking of him. Esau seems to be the only thing he had on his mind. So looking at Nabal and Abigail, again, what would be things you bring out from this relationship, from these dynamics? What would you say are warning signs, areas of concern? Certainly, again, we have a lack of communication between spouses. Frankly, not a lot of respect, and it sounds like in Nabal's case, the lack of respect has kind of been earned, right? He wasn't a person of very good character, but just the same, kind of having to work around each other rather than working together. He's thinking in a small-minded fashion and really just thinking about saving a few bucks as opposed to looking at the bigger picture like Abigail is able to do. There's several things we could pull out here. So if you have any other comments on Nabal and Abigail, I'm interested and would like to hear those. Okay, so here's one that's not actually a couple. You've got Joseph and the situation with Potiphar's wife in Genesis chapter 39. So some of the concerns here are pretty blatant, but I guess I've listed it as Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Maybe I should say, what about Potiphar and Potiphar's wife? She's just flat out trying to cheat on her husband. Joseph is young and good looking, and she is going after him and pestering him constantly, wants to sleep with him, won't leave him alone. And what I think is interesting about this is not so much like what are the dynamics between Potiphar and his wife, but this the way that Joseph in this story, the way that Joseph is connecting his integrity to his relationship with God. So I guess really the relationship I'm most interested here, not so much Potiphar and his wife. Clearly this is a messed up relationship, but between Joseph and God. Look, he says, when she says, I want you to sleep with me, she's kind of cornered him. When he wasn't expecting her, she kind of pops out and grabs him. And he just lists out and says, look, I am in charge of so many things in this household. Your husband has put me over everything. The only thing he's got to worry about when he wakes up in the morning is what's for breakfast and then later what's for dinner. I run everything. He's entrusted me with everything. I'm not going to do that to him. But he concludes and says, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? I love the way he keeps that bigger perspective here in the way that he makes his ethical choices. It's not, hey, what am I supposed to do? The ladies can't resist me. Whatever lame line he could throw out there. Joseph is really set on being a person of integrity. That means in the way that he treats his owner, employer, but then also it's clear he's not doing all the good work that he's doing just for Potiphar's sake. He's doing it because he wants to honor God with his life. And if the way that God chooses to use me right now is to send me to be a servant of this Egyptian guy, then I'll serve admirably. But I'm going to do it for God, and I'm not going to do something to dishonor God. You have to respect his integrity. Let's see. This is interesting too, Randall. Despite his foolishness, Nabal was a rich man. How did he get that way, and how did he stay that way? Sounds like Mrs. Mrs. Abigail there must have been a pretty good household manager. It was not uncommon for women to sometimes be kind of the purse keepers of the household. So, men would go out and do this or that and do the public interacting. Women mostly stayed at the house, but they really did try to kind of own that area and manage it well. So the home was very much considered kind of the realm of women. And so my guess is that Abigail was propping him up quite a bit. And then in just kind of a sociological angle, something that's interesting to me, my understanding is that when they've studied things like the gender pay gap, when they've taken when you're going to study something like that, you got to look at a bunch of different angles, right? Like men and women might make different amounts of money. So you got to look not just at their gender, but their personalities, the types of work they're choosing, how likely they are to pull back from that work and stay home. There's like a bunch of different factors you can look at. Apparently there is, much more so than gender itself, there is a positive association between a person who's willing to be disagreeable and greater career advancement and higher pay. What that means is that people who are willing to be disagreeable, kind of combative, to stand up to people, those are the ones who tend to get paid more. And they found that women who are willing to be disagreeable often make salaries quite comparable, sometimes more than their male counterparts. So a lot of women will do like assertiveness training, but people who are assertive, willing to be disagreeable, a lot of times can do pretty well because they're going to fight for number one. And it sounds like Nabal does not at all mind treating anyone else badly to make sure he gets another dollar. So just by nature of his disposition, it might have helped him get ahead. I think Abigail's probably what kept him ahead, so to speak. But yeah, I don't know that for sure. That's me speculating, but that could be part of it. Potiphar might have been a eunuch. I have no idea on that. All right. Let's keep moving. There's a couple of other scriptures I wanted to look at with you. So Kevin talked about this a few weeks ago in a Sunday afternoon lesson. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Peter is very clear here that much of how, he's talking to kind of to the men, much of how we are able to connect with God has to do with the way in which we show love and respect for our spouses. So what Peter's doing here, and I think this is the point that Kevin tried to make, what Peter's doing here is not trying to say, in using the term like the weaker partner, he's not speaking about the value of women as if they're less valuable or of lesser standing in the eyes of God. It really seems to be more of a purely physical thing. I mean, the facts are that men, even from the time they're babies, it's really interesting to me. We've been watching as Joaquin is growing, and like there's different growth charts for little boys and little girls. So men do have larger bone structure, considerably more muscle mass, and in an ancient culture where everything is kind of physical, it's easy to see how pretty readily men will just dominate because physically they're able to. And so that dynamic is in play. And I think even in a culture like ours that is trying to be more even-handed, or, these days people are, I don't even want to delve into all the issues we've got going on around us with, trying to make sense of gender differences and how we treat the various sexes and all this stuff. But it is significant, though, what Peter is saying about trying to treat each other with kindness and respect. So when we're talking about influence, this to me is an important passage. So treat your wives. Sure, you're bigger than them. You got bigger muscles than them, probably. That's not always the case, but generally, that would be the case. But the thing to do is to actually respect them and understand that they're on equal footing with you in terms of being heirs in Christ. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know nothing about that, Randall. My commentary says the word translated officer originally meant eunuch. However, they question whether it was intended literally. Many cultures required palace officers to be eunuchs, and especially if they're like interacting with the queen, right? You got that going on in the book of Esther. You have some eunuchs involved. Yeah, would that have been Potiphar? I mean, it's hard to imagine. I guess for reasons of status, you could still take a wife, but I don't know, Randall. All I could really do is speculate on that. I don't know anything about that, but yeah, that's what your commentary says. I don't know any different and have ground to correct that or push back on that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is an interesting passage, though, in reflecting on influence. Also, John chapter 14 and verse 15. This is Jesus talking to us about his relationship with us, where he says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Now, you can apply that in a harsh way, but I think a gentler way to look at this is, if you actually care about me, you'll let me have influence in the way you live your life. So I don't think the expectation is that we will keep everything perfectly that he commanded, but sure is nice to see that because of what he commanded, we alter our plans, we alter our steps, we change our priorities. I think that's important. All right. I just want to mention as we're going here that if you are just tuning in or seeing this content on someone's page, we're here every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Would encourage you to go to our fan page on Facebook, King's Crossing Church of Christ, like that page, or also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can see our Wednesday night lessons live on both of those spaces, as well as our Sunday afternoon lesson that Kevin Burr does. But this is also where you find our Sunday streaming services, which, by the way, man, we are so close on. We got the internet upgraded. Now we've been making some physical upgrades to the equipment in the sound booth, and boy, we are really, really close now to being ready to start just actually live streaming the worship services. So keep your fingers crossed, and it's been a very long time coming, but we're working on it. So this is a statistic I came across in the Gottman's research, and boy, this one haunted me. But they say that it is stereotypically men who tend to be less open to sharing power with their spouse, allowing influence from their spouse. But what they found is that men who absolutely refuse to share power with their spouse, like, I don't care what she thinks, I'm the man, I say, this is what goes. It doesn't matter what she thinks. She needs to adapt to what I say. Men who are like that, there's an 81% chance of their marriage crumbling. Boy, that is an alarmingly high number. I didn't look at the study underneath, the quote, but they put that in, published it in their book. So I generally trust them on these things. So whether or not that's the actual number, that's a pretty good alarm clock that if you are not in the habit of allowing your spouse input into the decisions, certainly decisions affecting them, man, you are in big trouble. You are in some very dangerous territory. Something else they found that is interesting to me is that, let's say there's a disagreement. Something that women tend to do is that women are much more likely either to ratchet down, like we're frustrated, but women are a lot more likely to kind of ratchet that down and try and express things a little more moderately, or at least to match the negativity of their spouse. So, whatever's going on, even if there's frustration, it's not typically the woman who escalates conflict. Once it kind of gets going, she tends to kind of match what her partner is doing, but doesn't try to make it ramp up. Men, though, are much more likely to respond. We remember we've talked about the four horsemen in a relationship, some really unhealthy responses to conflict, but men tend to be the ones who respond negatively and in such a way that it might actually ramp up the conflict, just resisting her influence. And so let's say, for example, we're frustrated and we're arguing and she says, look, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. A man would be much more likely to either, one, just ignore her completely, right? Stonewalling. So I don't care what she says. I'm just going to pretend I'm not hearing it or ignore you, give you the silent treatment. Or to get defensive. You're not listening to me. Oh, yeah, I am. Criticism. She says, you're not listening to me. He says, why would I listen? You don't ever make any sense, right? Like how do you come back from that? It's a personal attack. And then, open contempt. Listen to you. Why would I waste my time with that? Right? So those are all hurtful responses and are much more typical of men than of women, unfortunately. Here's one of my all-time favorite images I saw on the internet. Someone posted this. I shared it a couple of years ago. This year, thousands of men will die from stubbornness. And somebody went there with a can of spray paint and said, no, we won't. So that to me is a great encapsulation of part of what this problem is, right? This tendency, you raise an issue, rather than me pulling back and considering the issue, I just kind of get the guns blazing and start pushing back. So I thought you might appreciate that one. Okay, so when people are young, this is another thing. I don't quite know what to do with this. The Gottman Institute is definitely not like Christian in its orientation. They're just kind of studying relationships. But apparently, this is a global trend. Like this has been true of the two sexes all throughout the world in as much of history as we know about. But in young ages, like in preschool, for example, 35% of like best friends, someone like your little child goes to preschool and has a best friend. Like 1 in 3 of those will be a boy and a girl being best friends. Early on, they connect with each other pretty easily. They become friends easily, and that's normal. Sometime, though, between ages 5 to 7, there is a noted increase of boys only being willing to accept influence from boys. So in whatever they're going to do, they'll listen to the other boys. They don't care what the girls think. So between ages 5 to 7, that becomes pretty normal. And a lot of girls, if you talk to them, they'll just tell you that they're fed up with boys being unwilling to listen or include them and to stop trying to connect with them. And so you've got this weird period of time where between, around first grade until puberty, it's kind of like the boys and girls are mostly just friends with their own sex, not with members of the opposite sex. And then, of course, from that point, boys are really only receiving influence from other boys. And unfortunately, men don't generally do as well at emotional intelligence, understanding how to connect to people emotionally, understanding how emotions work and what to do with them. And so in their claim, they would say that only about 35% of newlywed husbands are what they would consider, according to their testing, as emotionally intelligent. So we get started and we get married and we love each other, but a guy very often simply does not have the tools to connect with, work with, take input from another person in a way that's healthy enough. And again, I can't really argue with their statistics. I just find that really interesting. But our tendency to be separate in a lot of those early years, it's like they may not interact at all hardly until they're in puberty, and then everything is weird and everyone's trying to figure out what to do. So I don't know how to solve that one. That does seem to be generally true about the world. So what I am going to do for this slide anyways, I wanted to suggest some things that you want to be true about you. So if you're striving for greater emotional intelligence, if you're striving to be a better spouse, here's some things that you want to be true about you. You want someone to be able to say about you, my spouse is interested in my opinions on our basic issues. So when your spouse says to you, hey, can I talk to you about such and such? You make time to have that conversation. And when the conversation happens, you actually show interest in it. Like you don't just be dismissive and, oh, it's just you being this or whatever, like you actually try to engage. That's a sign of emotional intelligence. You should try to do that. My spouse wants me to feel like what I say counts. Super unhealthy to use that four horsemen approach to where your spouse tells you something they're concerned about. Well, how come we never get to do this? Or it really bothers me that we haven't done this. And rather than fighting back, you might say, okay, let's figure out a way to make that possible because I want to take you seriously. And even though I'm not coming from the same angle you are, here, let's include what you care about because that's important. My spouse tries to communicate respect even when we disagree. And that's a healthy thing. It is totally okay, as we've talked about, totally okay sometimes to have conflicts in your relationship, sometimes even very heated conflicts. But what you don't want is to get to the point that you don't respect each other or treat each other respectfully. So it's nice to be able to say, hey, sometimes we've had some harsh disagreements, but she's never truly disrespectful of me. We just feel strongly in some different ways for some different reasons. Yes, that's important. My spouse can usually find at least something to agree with in my position. Isn't it healthy to look for common ground when we are feeling frustrated, when we are tense about what to do next? I was really happy with that being selected as the name for the major campaign that we did at our church over the last few years, resulting in this new facility that we've got to work with. We want to try and find something that we have in common. We want to find some areas that we agree on so we can build on those things. So I think that's important. Yeah, Randall, I've seen this before and I like it a lot. Written on the side of a building, 3 things I hate. Number 1, graffiti. Number 2, irony. And number 3, lists. Yeah, that's good stuff. So these are just a few. There's a lot more we could point to, but if you're wanting to move in the right direction, let these things become true about you in the way that you conduct yourself. I think that's a healthy place to start. So if you have a tendency, and again, I'm probably talking more to the men than to the women on this because it tends to be more of a male problem, not to include our spouses in how we think and what decisions we want to make. It may take time to correct a tendency not to include each other, but acknowledging the problem is a great first step. So just like anything else, from the examples I'm sharing, obviously some of these things are traits that I guess they kind of seem innate, things that are just with us from the time we're very little. So to try and be married to someone so different and to overcome some of the things that feel most natural, it requires us to really reach beyond ourselves for something different. So it's very good if you're at least willing to acknowledge, hey, I think I see that I did this and I didn't really ask your opinion and I get why you're mad about it. I need to work on this. Let's work together on a plan for how I can, you can bring up to me when this is getting to be a problem. You'll have something you can say to me, or we'll have some little ritual between us to help us draw attention to this when it's an issue. But acknowledging it is a great first step. Let's see. Well, there we go. Yeah, so if you're trying to sort through this, what a good, humble gesture to do something like this, absolutely worth doing in your relationship, is to let your partner tell you what your blind spots are. Believe me, they know it, right? Like the person you are spending your life with, the person that your livelihood hangs around, who might well be the other parent of your children, you absolutely know what they're like, or you try to. So you might just ask your spouse, hey, gently, be nice, but I'm asking you to help me. What are some of the ways that maybe I am being unwittingly, like, or unintentionally domineering? Are there some ways that I'm kind of running over you and not really giving you any say? Am I being domineering? Do I sometimes get more defensive than I ought to? Do you see me kind of getting up my defense when in fact you weren't even attacking? What are some times that you see me doing that? How can I be more aware of that? And then are there times that you feel that I'm disrespecting you? What am I doing that's making you feel belittled? Yeah, those are good conversations to have, and I would suggest that you go through go through marriage together, and those are all conversations you're going to have at some point, because you're going to have blind spots. You're going to have things you do that, man, I just cringe when I think of some of the things I've done over the years where I've ended up sticking my foot in my mouth, or being really hurtful without realizing how hurtful I was being. We have those blind spots. And so try to keep a relationship with your spouse. And I think actively inviting those kinds of comments is a really helpful thing. And frankly, that's been a useful thing to me in my vocation as well. I have worked hard at kind of cultivating good relationships with each of the elders. And I have done that each year that I've been here. I've tried to get a different one of the elders to go, agree to be like a partner for the year, where once a month we go to lunch together, and maybe we talk shop a little bit, but really it's more of a let's get to know each other as human beings and as Christians, and try to encourage each other and pray for each other. And that for me is something that I always just go ahead and get on the table and say, hey, while you're going to be talking with me this year, I want you to feel like really free to point things out to me that you think I'm not seeing. So am I doing something that's creating a problem that I'm not aware of? That I handle something in a way that created problems for you that you wish I would have done differently? That is a super useful way to relate to people who you work with, because it's like nobody wants to have that awkward conversation. Oh man, having a problem with this person. How am I going to bring it up? If you go ahead and just open that door and say, hey, not going to fight you, just help me see it. Man, that sows a lot of peace. Very, very good. Yeah, thank you, Sandy. Yeah, communication. Yeah, we've just got to talk. We've got to really talk, and not just in a way that I am catching my breath as I prepare to say my next thing, but communicating really means listening, doesn't it? It means I talk some and I'm open and honest with you, but I'm also trying hard to learn your perspective and what it is you have to say. So I think that's a good conversation to have. Am I being domineering? Am I being defensive? Am I being disrespectful? Maybe there's ways I'm even aware of, but you probably are more aware than I am. So what am I doing that's making you feel that way? And help me see that. In general, so what we're doing over these weeks, I'm kind of building on some of the Gottman Institute's Healthy Relationship House material. And so I'm walking through a few of these items, kind of blending with a few other concepts. But over the last few weeks, here's some things we've talked about. And as we talk about what we're doing tonight with influence, like letting your partner influence you, I would suggest that an ability to have good influence between spouses is really like the foundation of that would be these other things we've been talking about. So we talked about, love maps, getting to really know your spouse. If I really get to understand you, I know who your friends are. I know what your major sources of stress are right now. I know what you've got on your radar. I know what it is you're most concerned about. If we really know each other well, that's a great starting point. We want to continue nurturing fondness and admiration for each other. So let's find things that we enjoy about each other, find things that we enjoy doing together, learning to focus on the good in each other rather than just trying to hone in on the things we don't like or wish were different. Yeah, nurture your fondness and admiration. Treat your spouse as if they're someone who's worth respecting and caring about. So nurture that. And then when you're having conflict, avoid the four horsemen. Don't turn away from each other, but instead try to always end somehow turning toward each other. Those bids for connection we talked about. Find some way to bring things back together. And I think with these three things in play, if this is the foundation you're building off of, influence from your spouse is a thing that comes much easier because I know what you're like. I like you. I think well of you, and we're connected. And so when you have an opinion, I'm a lot more likely to take it seriously. So you kind of see how those things progress and build on each other. So this, you're saying as a guy, Joe, I think really this is as a human being, learn you don't have to win. And there are some things that just don't matter enough to argue about. Yeah, I think a lot of times, Joe, we need to redefine what it means to win. Because when you're fighting with your spouse, and I would say this is also true of the church, like anytime you have gone to battle with your fellow Christians, and let's assume it's not a physical, literal battle, right? Let's assume we're talking about like verbal sparring and emotional wounds. Anytime you go to battle with someone that your life is connected to, nobody wins. You both only lose from that, because you can't harm them without also harming yourself and harming our collective witness, or in a marriage, harming what it is that you're supposed to have together because you're one person. So just the way that I can't cut my arm without hurting myself, you can't cut your spouse with your words without also hurting yourself. So yeah, it's not the case that you need to win, and in fact, winning by diminishing them really is a loss for both of you. My father is a really gentle person. He retired. His whole career he worked for human resources. He did hiring and firing people for a place called MDHA in Nashville. Owned kind of run. It was a government agency. Did a lot of public housing stuff. But anyway, he was kind of an administrator and worked with people. But what he used to tell me, and I think this is pretty wise, he would say a lot of times if I've got to go into a meeting or a conversation where things are fairly contentious, I might just try to figure out, what is the one thing I really need to walk away from this with. So it might be that whatever it is, I need to make sure I don't agree to such and such an item. And he said, I can get in there and they can cuss me up and down and say whatever they want about me and accuse me of this or that, or insult me or belittle me, or we can squabble, or we can concede this and this and this over here. But he says, it's kind of like, as long as I get this thing, I know that was the real thing that I worried about. I think that's good advice for a lot of situations where it really doesn't matter if I win an argument or not. I'm more concerned with what's the bigger takeaway. And from harsh arguing, like to your point, Joe, a lot of things really aren't worth arguing about. But is it more important to win an argument, or is it more important to have a good relationship with your spouse? And depending on what the issue is, sometimes those are either or kinds of scenarios where I've got to either pick this one or that one. And this stupid thing, even if I like it or I think it's a stupid thing, might be worth letting that go because my spouse is a thing I want to hang on to, through all this. My relationship with my spouse is something that matters much, much more than that other stuff matters to me. So I don't need to win. I'd rather not even argue. But even if I did argue, I don't ever want to cross a line that starts treating this thing as more important than the core thing, this relationship that I have. So good. I'm just about to wrap up, I believe. Any other comments or thoughts? I'm glad to hear those from you. Appreciate everyone weighing in this evening. But influence. One of the healthiest things you can do in your relationship is to allow your spouse, your significant other, to influence you and the decisions that you make and the way that you do things. Now, of course, you pick kind of a scoundrel for your partner, that can have some bad consequences. So, this is kind of based on the assumption you're trying to pick an upright, godly person as the one you're going to link your life to. But when you have that kind of a link to someone, you do want to include them and treat them as if they are valuable, because whether or not you agree with their thought processes or what emotions they're experiencing, that is part of your reality, and you're much wiser to take those things into account. So I believe that's about all that I had to say on that one for this evening. I would encourage you to like this video, share this content on your page if you're comfortable with that. And as always, you can subscribe at rmd.at/KC Midweek if you'd like to get those texts about upcoming classes. Appreciate everyone being here. As always, you can send me any questions, comments, thoughts that you have. What was my take on the picture I showed at the beginning? Yeah, I know the direction that went. We got a couple of comments about how a person might kind of veer off in different directions, different understandings. Yeah, to me, it was the idea that by, I like the image of light, right? Like you're enlightening me. Like by me listening to you, I'm kind of receiving. Let me just give me a sec here. I'm going to go back to that. Go back to that image. Pull back the curtain, my little Wizard of Oz moment, so you see my desktop there. Yeah, so this was the image that I pulled up. I liked this because there's kind of the differences, right? Like you've got the circle and the prism. I like the idea that it really does give me enlightenment. I am enlightened by authentically listening to another person. I tended to think of the stuff on the right more like my imagination. Like once I've gained this insight from well, it's happened a lot of times with Carolina. Like she's told me, man, you did this, and this is how you're going to make a bunch of people feel because of how you did this. And I'm like, I didn't mean that by it. I wasn't thinking about that. It wouldn't have even occurred to me to think that, and I wouldn't have thought that if someone else did this to me. But a lot of times she's just been completely right about something like that. And I think about now, because of that information, lots of different directions where, well, remembering what I learned about that, I should treat this differently. So it may be the case that the wisdom we gain from each other, it's not just specific to that circumstance. It might be something applicable in many circumstances, which is, to me, a lot of how wisdom works, that you kind of get some good ideas in one area of life about how things are, only to discover that what tools you built over here have a lot of usefulness in these other spaces that you occupy. So yeah, for whatever reason, I really liked that image and the idea of kind of the multifaceted application of what it is I gained from another human being. So yeah, that's my response to that, Sandy. Thank you for asking. All right. Well, appreciate everyone's weighing in tonight. I'm going to close this with a word of prayer, and we'll let you guys get going. God, we are grateful for the ways that you do influence us, that you have given us your word, you have given us the example of Christ, and I pray that you help us to be open to you in as many ways as we can, because the more we are receptive to your heart and what you care about, the better our lives are. You really do give us things that are good for us, that make us wise, that make us more loving, and so help us to grow in all of these areas. Lord, we are so grateful for the time we've had here together this evening. Please continue to bless us the rest of this week. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. You guys have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon.